Hi, friends. I'm Andy Green, and I'm intact. In this episode, we'll find out exactly what that means and test my knowledge of circumcision with a true-false quiz that reveals the myths and history around the procedure. You can play along if you like, because this is the Naked Man Podcast. This week, we're making Naked Man history with our first episode featuring two guests. First up is Georganne Chapin, CEO and founding executive director of Intact America, the largest national organization working to end child genital cutting in this country. Georganne has a BA in anthropology from Barnard College, an MPhil in sociomedical sciences from Columbia University, and a JD from Pace University School of Law, with certificates in health law and international law. She's taught health law and bioethics, and today it's going to all come together to focus on Georganne's mission to end the routine circumcision of baby boys in America. And we're going to do so with the help of Willy Kaye, a gentleman healer who has worked as a counselor, teacher, and massage therapist, and is a certified advanced Rolfer. And I didn't know what Rolfing was until I visited Willy's website, and it sounds like a whole other episode, another adventure that I want to go on. It's a system for improving human physical structure and function by slowly stretching and freeing the connective tissue. And after studying with Dr. Ida Rolf through the Rolf Institute, Willy has helped his clients with physical and emotional trauma for over 35 years. Willy is a circumcision survivor, a man bravely joining us today to tell his story, a story that I've needed to hear for 35 years. So Georganne Chapin and Willy Kaye, welcome to the Naked Man Podcast.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me and Willy together. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Great combination.
It seems like we have all the ingredients we need for this conversation. And I'm really, I said to both of you that this conversation in some way is the scariest one for me, even though it's like, I don't actually feel scary in this moment, but talking about penises, talking about foreskin or circumcision, when I entered therapy, that was the scariest thing for me to talk about. Like, I was shaking, admitting that I was intact, and how I would say it was that I was uncircumcised, which, as I was told, that's not the way, and even in the way you say that, I'm uncircumcised, I'm saying that something is sort of wrong with me and how I thought about myself. And so I just wanted to sort of lay that there to start, and just thank you so much for being here to, I think, maybe soothe and educate the child Andy, who is too afraid to look up stuff on the internet, honestly.
I think it's so interesting. In all the years I've been doing this work, I have not talked to somebody I've talked to people who were, made fun of for being intact, or made to feel like a little freaky. But what you describe as a source of trauma, I really have not had. I've heard from a few individuals, but to take this public as a topic, I think we're going to be astonished at the response. I'm sure there are going to be a lot more people who are going to want to pursue this than has ever been done before.
Yeah, I mean, it was a secret that I had. It was I didn't know anyone, because my parents or my dad was circumcised, and my grandfather was, and it was just not talked about. So there was just sort of this, I just felt different. And then the messaging I received from, it's all over the place, movies, TV, and just classmates, friends. To this day, people on my softball team or something will make a crack about foreskin, and I, will feel shame if I don't speak up, but I also am I don't necessarily know if I really want to start a thing right now, but we're going to start it right now. Heck yeah.
So you have not seen this quiz, is that correct?
No, I have not seen the quiz. I didn't no cheating here. I am.
Okay, awesome. So the number one is the true or false question. True or false? Circumcision was once promoted in the United States to prevent young men from masturbating.
True.
Correct.
Yes.
So William Harvey Kellogg, the guy who invented cornflakes, was a Seventh-day Adventist who promoted circumcision to discourage young men from pleasuring themselves. And he was so zealous against masturbation that he advocated amputating a boy's foreskin without any anesthesia, and also recommended applying carbolic acid to the genitals of young girls to keep them from masturbating. And this was during the Victorian era, the mid to late 19th century into the 20th century.
True or false? Circumcision is just a little snip.
That seems like messaging that I've been led to believe, but I think I'm going to say false.
Well, that's correct. The foreskin is firmly attached to the head of the glands of the penis, and it must be pried away before it can be cut off. You can imagine removing a fingernail from the finger. It's similar to that in terms of the alteration of the tissue.
God, that's what, like, just a fingernail is like my worst nightmare of like losing off. And then we're talking about the penis, the most sensitive area I can think of.
Well, the next one is a little related. So the next one is true or false, babies don't feel pain.
Oh, that seems like a big false. Babies feel pain. They got to. We all feel pain. What?
You know how many decades doctors claim that babies didn't feel pain? And it's been one of the excuses that no kind of analgesic was ever used for circumcision until fairly recently. They would just immobilize the baby and carve away.
Ooh.
Here's another question for you. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends circumcision. True or false?
Based on my modicum of research, this one feels like I'm in between, and that they like recommend their parents make the decision with the doctor. I don't know if it's necessarily like, but it's definitely not said not to do it, which is, and it's sort of basically seems like afraid to make a stance or opinion. So, but I guess I'll just say true because they're not saying no. Is that a clear answer?
It's false. No medical society, including the AAP, recommends circumcision. The AAP stated the benefits slightly outweigh the risks. However, the AAP itself has admitted that it has never systematically studied the risks. So
you're right. They make it the parents' problem.
How do they study the benefits outright? Like if they haven't studied the risks, that's like the most boneheaded sentence I've ever heard. Yeah. Oh man.
Boneheaded. That's a technical term. You're exactly right.
Yeah. No, I have many degrees as well, Georganne. A bachelor's degree in sports sciences, actually. But yeah.
True or false? The United States is the only Western developed country that routinely cuts the genitals of baby boys.
I will say true to that.
That is true.
Yeah, I think I've lived the somehow feeling like I was and this is I'm a white dude, and I thought this was like I was and that's my privilege, but the like having foreskin felt like a rare thing because it was never, I don't know, I just didn't see it around. And so that like and it's also growing up without the internet, and now being like, oh, okay, yeah, the world is a much bigger place than the U.S. Thank God.
80% of the men in the world are intact.
80%.
80%.
Wow.
Almost all European countries, most Asian countries, with the exception of the Philippines, and the exception in terms of countries where it's routinely done is in the Middle East and some in Africa.
True or false? A baby boy's foreskin must be pulled back to clean under it.
I have a visceral memory of my pediatrician like teaching me or helping me how to pee with my foreskin, and that like I needed to pull it back because I kept sort of making messes after peeing, like I was done but not done, if that makes sense. So like that, but I mean, I feel like it's false. Like I feel like the foreskin also like self cleans, but that. So yeah, I'm gonna say false, but I think there's something in there that like pinged for me as well.
Right, you're right that it's false. And if you think back to what we were saying about the foreskin being firmly attached to the head of the penis, even the American Academy of Pediatrics tells parents nobody should ever forcibly retract the foreskin. So the foreskin's attached to the head of the penis. It'll loosen naturally, and there's no need to clean under it any more than you would pry under your fingernail to clean. And because it's painful and can create permanent damage, nobody but the boy himself should ever retract his foreskin. So I don't know the content of what you were taught. It's pretty disturbing what we hear, that retracting the foreskin is kind of doctors and nurses kind of insist on it, even though the Pediatric Association doesn't recommend against it. They proscribe it. So,
Oof.
A cut penis is cleaner than an intact penis. True or false?
I definitely was told that so many times. True. I'm going to say false. And that, I think me feeling dirty was like a big thing growing up.
Yeah. So cleaning an intact baby boy's penis is no different. Just dipping him in the water and drying him off. There's no extra work involved in cleaning an intact boy's penis. And in terms of recently circumcised penis, there's absolutely, I like to say, there's nothing clean about a open wound in a dirty diaper, which is what you're doing when you circumcise an infant.
So along the same subject, true or false, the foreskin protects the glands, which is the head of the penis, from losing sensation as one ages.
True.
There you go.
I can attest to that. And it's now where I've gone from, going from a 16-year-old that was dreaming of circumcision. Can you even imagine that? Like, that was my fantasy. To now being like, oh, that's I'm feeling more things. And it's also, protecting me from
so what
other things.
Happens when you cut off the foreskin is you turn the glans penis, the head of the penis, which is meant to be an internal organ, sort of like the tongue is an internal organ protected by the lips of the mouth, right? And you're turning it into an external organ. So it dries out, it rubs against clothing or anything else, loses its natural moisture, and eventually it becomes keratinized. It develops kind of a thin layer of callus and loses sensation. So you've really undermined nature and the entire purpose of the foreskin.
Yeah, the idea that we need to change things immediately upon giving birth, to me, it's just so upsetting.
That is very upsetting. So another question, true or false question, circumcision protects men from HIV, AIDS, and STDs.
I believe that's true. Well, or I mean, I don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't necessarily want to say that means oh, you're I'm going to say true, but maybe in a small thing. It's not like you're immune to AIDS if you have foreskin.
It's false.
Okay.
It's
okay.
false.
Yeah. I wanted to.
A Canadian study showed that circumcised men contracted HIV at the same rate as intact men.
Okay.
And also that European men who are intact have lower rates of HIV infection than American men. So it doesn't do the job.
So here's another one about risk. Circumcision lowers risk of contracting penile cancer. True or false?
Well, now I'm sheepish about saying true after the last one because I feel stupid. So, but now I'm I don't know. Cutting it doesn't feel healthy, so maybe it does. But I'm just gonna say true to be consistently wrong. Let's see.
And guess what? It's false.
Yeah. I knew
so,
it.
but you can be forgiven for not being 100% clear on this. For one thing, penile cancer, which is thrown out there as a justification for circumcising every baby boy, is one of the rarest cancers around. Only 1 out of 100,000 men will ever develop penile cancer. And the American Cancer Society itself does not recommend circumcision as a preventive measure. Again, 1 out of 100,000 men will get penile cancer. 1 out of 8 women will get breast cancer. And we certainly don't go lopping off baby girls' breasts to prevent that kind of cancer. So that one is false. And really, I consider one of the red herrings that gets thrown out there. So, true or false? I bet you get this one right. Sex is more pleasurable with an intact partner.
True.
Correct.
I mean, I wouldn't know otherwise, but yeah.
Increasingly, more and more American women are realizing as they get more experience and learn more that literally a partner with who has been circumcised is literally missing something. It doesn't mean that can't have pleasurable sex, but without the foreskin, men tend to have to need more friction to make up for a desensitized glands, and a frequent complaint of women in this country is that their lovers pound them, and there's a lot of criticism of women for being too dry, and a circumcised penis is drier than an intact penis. So a lot of the common complaints that women have about sex that American women have about sex have to do with circumcision.
And that's a very classic men United States thing to make it the woman's problem.
Right.
Uh,
So the next question is, circumcision makes the penis smaller, true or false?
I mean, if this was true, it'd be the best, like in the sad way for like marketing campaign. That would be the best marketing campaign for, toxic masculinity. Like, oh, you'll have a bigger penis if you don't. But I mean, I don't know. It feels, you'll have a bigger penis or a smaller one if you circumcise. I mean, I'll say true. That feels like you're having less skin.
Yeah, that's true.
The statistics are 4 millimeters less wide and 8 millimeters shorter than the average intact penis. And you're right, that should be enough to make people not do it, but people will argue you to the death. No, the circumcising penis doesn't make it smaller. And, the answer is like if you cut the crust off of bread, and weigh it before and after,
is it
going to be the same weight, the same size? Of course it makes it smaller.
Yeah.
Okay, the last one we're going to ask you is, and I'm going to put in a qualifying word here. We'll see what you say. Circumcision is relatively safe.
Well, I don't know the statistics of how many circumcisions lead to, I mean, I would say, if the medical association says like it's whatever, that it is seen as true, it's relatively safe. But I think we're proving that it's, maybe not so much, especially the psychological elements that I think we're going to talk about going into it. I don't know. I feel like I walked around that one.
Well, but, it's understandable that you would, because really we're gaslighted about that. We're told that it's benign, it's routine, it's just a small procedure. We don't use the words snip. Circumcision's not safe. Approximately 100 babies a year in the U.S. die from circumcision. The causes of death are usually spelled out as hemorrhage or infection. What's a newborn baby doing hemorrhaging from an open wound? Like, where did that happen? So the cause of death is usually covered over. Yes, 100 out of 1.4 million is not a huge death rate, except if you think that every single one of those circumcisions was completely unnecessary. And then infection, cosmetic complications, too much skin removed from one side, not enough from the other side. Baby's got to be taken back to clean up that surgery. And then one of the most common complications from circumcision is called meatal stenosis. And that is when the meatus, the opening of the urethra, closes up. And it can happen anytime in a child or man's life, and it only occurs among circumcised men. And it is relatively common. And it can lead to death if it's not picked up, say, for example, in an infant, if an infant stops being able to urinate. But if it's caught, it involves taking the person back into the hospital and having the reopened essentially in a tiny baby with a scalpel, and a grown man it's a much more extensive surgery. So it's not safe, and again, every single complication is completely unnecessary, because the circumcision shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Right. And that's, I think, where this all goes. Like, there's, ways to talk around it, I suppose. But if the idea is that there's no reason to do it, any risk, anything that is added, or any detriment, you're choosing detriments onto your child. That's what you're doing, or the potential or possibility, or whatever it is. Yeah. Whew.
So that's all we have for the quiz. It was a long quiz, but thank you. I think in answering them, you touched on so many things that are, how complex some of these statements are and how complex some of the answers are. So that's great.
Well, and thank you. And thank you for administering it. And I think also, it sort of uncovers some of the biases in my brain still, or the things that I'm like even afraid to sort of admit or believe, or that I've been told, and sort of, it's hard to know which is true, growing up in the US a lot of times. I think but I wanted to give space to you, Willy, and to sort of, because I don't want it to sound, because I come on saying like, oh, I have trauma from not having this thing. And I don't want it, like, I think it's a whole different thing. And I think what I have come around on is being so proud of who I am, and that it's taken me 35 years to be able to do a podcast that say, hey, I am an intact boy. But I just wanted to, like, Willy, I know that you are a circumcision survivor, and that you have a story around, like, sort of discovering that, your penis was not the natural penis you were born with. And I'm just really curious how that came about, and if you could share that with us.
Sure. My understanding of circumcision was very much in terms of education. Growing up, I just thought I was me. I didn't even know that I was or wasn't circumcised. It was just never talked about particularly. I maybe heard about it, but didn't think about it, because everybody, quote unquote, was circumcised. And everybody around me was. And so that's just kind of the way it was. And then in my early 20s, I began to study body psychotherapy and trauma therapy, and I became aware that, wait a minute, here's this procedure that happens to an infant that has to be traumatic. There's no reason for it, and it didn't take me long to realize that it was, peculiar to our culture, and that it didn't happen in most other places. Most boys were intact, but that was, and then soon thereafter, there was an anti-circumcision movement that was just being born in this country, and it was born by Marilyn Milos. And I remember getting one of her first newsletters, and it educated me further. And I was sold. I was saying, this is a trauma. This is not something that should be done. Whenever I had a chance, of course, I didn't have friends that were having too many children at that age. It's just in my early 20s, but whenever I had a chance, I advocated or spoke against it. And I felt that was on the right side of the argument, and that was fine. And that went on for 30 years or maybe more. And then one day along the pike, I was rolfing, and I had younger colleagues who were, I was mentoring some of them and helping them and befriending them. And one of them was this woman who Georganne now knows, named Ruthie Fraser, who's a rolfing practitioner in Hudson, New York. And she became pregnant. And she said, my back's killing me. You work on my back? And I said, sure, come on over. And she said, hey, we just got our sonogram and we found out we're having a boy. And I just said, I didn't hold myself back. I said, Ruthie, what are you going to do about circumcision? Because I was close with her. She could handle a question like that. And she looked at me, and with a well of emotion that was stronger than anything I'd ever seen in her, she said, no fucking way am I going to have that done to my kid. And at that moment, for the first time in my life, I realized that I was circumcised. In other words, I realized that I had been circumcised. I knew I was circumcised, but I suddenly realized the level of the effect of that trauma. And that was when I became an intactivist. That was 8 years ago. That's what it switched, and I became much more engaged in this dialogue because I suddenly realized, like, this is something that happened to me. And I started then re-examining all these things that had happened to me in the light of what I knew cognitively, but not hadn't accepted experientially, was this trauma that I had carried through. And then, you start to see it, and boy, there's a lot to see. And there's a lot to see in our culture. There's a lot to see in how men and women relate to each other in this culture. Georganne touched on it before about how men blame women for bad sex. It's like there is a lot, and I had done all of those things, in the blindness of the men being, buffaloed by our cultural attitudes. And so that was how I kind of woke up to this process. And the depth of the effects are, I think, we're only beginning to understand them. And, the research that's being done on PTSD and on trauma, it's only beginning now to understand what happens to the brain with an early trauma. And anyway, so that was how I became a born again intactivist. I was literally born again. So
thank you so much for sharing. And it makes so much sense that, you didn't see yourself as one of them, but also sort of you were pro it. And then it was just sort of like, you're joining the activism, joining the fight, but also it's sort of like you were then ready to experience, like what you said, the emotions, the feelings
it's
of
just
that.
Deeply profound. It's affected every aspect of my life. And previously, I thought I was just on the right side of an argument, of a moral and ethical argument, which I still am.
But you are one of the men that have been wounded by.
We people who worked in this field, as Georganne says, in the sex business, the penis business. We hear extraordinary stories, and sometimes they're what comes to mind is our culture. When I was campaigning on the street and talking to people once, this woman came up to me who was Vietnamese, and she said, we came as refugees at the end of the war, and when we were brought to this country, they took my mother and father, and they said we have to circumcise this boy to make him American. She was just sharing this to me because she knew we were out there campaigning against circumcision. So the nonsense of this procedure is really deeply embedded in our medical culture and our culture.
Yeah, our culture itself. It's an American thing, a wound badge, a shared trauma, like some sort of. But like to me, it feels very like indicative of a lot of the PTSD that you're saying, and that we're just only uncovering that, but also just like there's just growing up with that, and that we're taking, it seems like to me, as the person that I think it felt like men in my life that had been circumcised were not consciously sending that to people that had foreskin that were intact. It's sort of the idea of like, and that's why I thought I was the wrong one.
You didn't fit in because everybody else was traumatized. You were like the guy walking around who hadn't been, swallowed up by the invasion of the body snatchers.
And it made me feel like there was something wrong with me for not being a part of this. Why was my body not snatched? If even like my dad, my grandpa, or whatever, or if movies and TV, like, women also are, I'm sure it was written by men, but like women are saying how gross foreskin is in movies, and I still see that and stuff. And it always triggers me. Cards Against Humanity has a card, foreskin as a card. And I've played that game a lot. And every time foreskin is played, including by like a partner of mine, it has been like met with ew and gross or and it's like, yes, it's part of the collective, like we're making a joke about it, but it's just like, it's mind-boggling to me that is how it's like brainwashing, right? It feels like we've taught foreskin to be this gross, terrible thing to the people that have had it severed.
I think it's really important to say here that this is not just sort of a passive cultural evolution that took place. This is a very engineered industry. And none of this is accidental, including what you so perfectly identified as the American Academy of Pediatrics kind of waffling all over the place and intentionally creating confusion about, is it good? Is it bad? Well, we don't really know. Well, it doesn't really hurt anybody. Well, the benefits outweigh the risks. In the meantime, you're talking about 1.5 million boys, nearly 1.5 million boys being assaulted every single year in this country. And when now, as you also correctly observe, the pediatricians, the trade association has made it supposedly the responsibility of the parents to decide, because, you really can't be 100% sure, like sort of like climate change. Well, we don't really know. And sort of like ingesting sugar. Well, sugar isn't that harmful for you. Cigarettes before David Kessler.
Right.
All of this obfuscation and confusion mixed in with, well, but the parents wanted, it makes people happy. The boys will be ridiculed if they don't get circumcised. So all of this is intentionally created. And if you have any doubt about it, Intact America has done surveys that show that women who give birth are asked an average of 8.4 times if they plan to circumcise. Now, if it was really the parents' desire, as the American Academy of Pediatrics professes, why do you have to ask them 8 times? If it was really thought that you shouldn't be retracting baby boys' foreskins, why isn't somebody sending out an all-points bulletin to every emergency room and pediatric practice all over the country and saying, it's medical malpractice to forcibly retract a boy's foreskin? These practices are endemic, and they're paid for. Every single medical procedure in this country is paid for on a fee-for-service basis. Somebody gets to bill for it. If you think of 1.4 million circumcisions, the amount of medical equipment alone, gauze, Vaseline, hemostats, clamps, one-time circumcision kits that will then go into the landfill. You're talking about, we've calculated, close to a $6 billion industry. So this is not just like, oh, well, it's kind of evolved. It's part of American culture. It was part of Anglophone culture in England and Australia and New Zealand and Canada. Canada still has some vestiges of it. All the other English-speaking countries have given it up. They gave it up when they got national health insurance programs. So this is a real concerted effort to continue to make Americans cut their kids.
So many things. Georganne, thank you for, I think, layering it and coloring it in and giving us even more context. That, to me, it's just like, because it's like, yeah, it's symptomatic of all the other stuff I think that we're facing. I mean, you mentioned climate change, you mentioned all the other things too, but it's the idea that it's capitalism again. It's money making that we're putting above health or safety or just the well-being of our kids, and using it. And yeah, $6 billion and the equipment, the landfill. So there's an environmental price, and it's all, and I think it also, you mentioned, Dr. Kellogg, or not Dr. Kellogg. Why am I giving him a doctorate?
Yeah, he was a doctor.
Or is he a doctor?
Yeah.
I want to take it away, I guess, is why I said that. That he, it was started also as a detriment to masturbation. And so that there's also this sort of like puritanical element to it as well, right? It's this like, because we're deeply uncomfortable of talking about sex and penises. And that's why I didn't, this is not new. This was 20 years ago. I was not knowing how to talk about these things. Or a year ago.
And the irony is that you as an intact man are embarrassed to talk about your penis, and a circumcised man is embarrassed to talk about his penis and his trauma. We have so effectively, and women don't know much, they they're not told the facts either. So we have effectively shut down. We're doing this thing to 1.5 million babies a year. And those babies will grow up to be men with incomplete penises. And we are doing everything possible, not me and not Willy and not you, but the medical industry is doing everything possible to shut down these conversations. Combine it with the vilification of men expressing emotions around this, right? Like, oh, come on, get over it. It's not that bad. How could you possibly remember it? You should be happy. Everybody else, nobody else is complaining. I mean, I've heard in the 20 years since I've been an activist, and I have actually a similar story from Willy. For decades, I talked to my friends and relatives, told them not to circumcise their children, but I became an activist when my son, 18 at the time, thanked me for not having him circumcised. And it was like, I had that epiphany. Oh my gosh. I always thought it was a mean thing to do to a baby. And here's this mature guy, my son, thanking me, and all the things that went into him thanking me that we didn't articulate at the time. But, that was, so in the 20 years since I've been an outspoken activist, I've heard thousands of times, well, I never heard anybody complain. It's like, well, I have, or here, this is my friend Willy, he's complaining, this is so-and-so. Read the Voices column in intactamerica.org. There are every day more men coming out and saying, this is terrible. This stinks. This should never have been done to me. I'm furious. I'm hurt. I was harmed. I was violated. So finally, these conversations like the one that you're hosting now are so important, because there will be people watching this who will have Willy's experience, your experience, Andy, my experience, which is like, I lived for decades without realizing this stuff. And now we're speaking the truth.
It's easy to see that something's wrong and to be against it. Then you're on the right side of an argument. But if that vision includes that you were hurt, then you have to accept the fact that you've been damaged. And what effect is that? And that is a much bigger hill to climb. And I think that's why it's so hard for us to get over this, because it's a very tough hill to climb.
And if you notice, the medical industry has really effectively stopped. Their arguments are completely lame at this point, because there are studies that shows it doesn't prevent. I mean, the AIDS epidemic took off in this country. American cemeteries are full of men, circumcised men who died from AIDS, right? It doesn't prevent HIV. There are massive studies now. The Canadian study that Willy mentioned earlier, I believe it was 500,000 Canadian men that found absolutely no association between circumcision and HIV. And studies of the military have shown the same thing, no association between circumcision and other sexually transmitted diseases. We know it costs money. We know it takes up the personnel time of people who could be, during the COVID pandemic, the Surgeon General calls for suspending all elective surgeries, and every hospital in the country just kept cutting boys. Like, oh, well, that's not surgery, or that's just a little snip, or, they have it for every circumcision. There's a doctor doing the cutting. There's a nurse. There's the space. There's the equipment. There's the risk of a circumcision going south, hemorrhage, infection, all of those things. And you're doing that while people down the hall can't get a bed for fatal illness that's ravaging the country, and you're blithely cutting normal body parts off of babies. It just makes no sense. No. And it's all excused by, the parents want it.
Obviously, this goes deep. This conversation, it connects to all the other conversations we're having in this country and in the world. And to me, it speaks to even why I had started this show, of it came from a nugget of being like a lot of shame and hatred about who I was as a man, and as just a white man, a straight white man. And as I've gone into this, I now don't identify as any of those things anymore, because that's what was given to me. That's not how, and the idea that we now, this is one thing, like, that we have been hurt, we have been wounded. There are all these different messages we're getting on, and this is just part of it. And it feels like, yeah, foreskin feels like an easy one to avoid or to run away from, circumcision rather. Because like you said, William, or Willie, it's easier to avoid that conversation. It's easier to not feel that you're wounded or part of that. And it's like, I think I just want to commend you both for what you're working, and Willie for joining the fight as well. And I want to say that, like, well, you've converted me. You know, I'm an intactivist now, and let me know how I can help. And I want to give you both the opportunity to tell the listeners and anyone watching how they can get involved, and also more about your book, Georganne, or how people can find you.
I wrote a memoir. It's going to come out in February 2024. It's called This Penis Business, and it came from a friend of mine asking me how I got into this penis business. And I needed to answer that because it's something that's been with me for I'm 70. It's been with me for 60 years when I witnessed my brother coming home from the hospital after being circumcised, my newborn brother. And then he had to be taken back to have his urethra opened, as I described earlier, with meatal stenosis. And of course, I had no words for any of this. But I remember seeing his bloody penis, and I remembered what my mother looked like when she brought him back after that second surgery. And so something that really haunted me for my whole life. And when my son was born, I was close to 30 and never crossed my mind. I sort of would have had the same response that Ruthie Fraser had, which is, not over my dead body. Is he going to, no one's going to cut his penis. In writing the memoir, I knew a lot of things that I would be talking about and uncovering, but what really kept revealing itself to me was the extent of the trauma in this country. There's almost nobody. Everyone has a circumcision story, even the people who don't realize they have one. We have a campaign, Intact America campaign, called Skin in the Game, and our books are part of the promotion of that. We're just going to be launching it. And we did photo shoots so far in Atlanta and Dallas, and we asked people to come in if they wanted to talk about circumcision. And some people came, they were curious, and turned out they all have a circumcision story. Well, I never realized my grandson, they want to do a third surgery on him. He won't have anything left. My son, when we brought him home after the circumcision, it was, he didn't stop crying for 3 months. He cried after every diaper change. His bris was my son's bris was the worst day of my life. I couldn't get over it. So, and men would say, I've never been able to have sex the way nature meant for me to be able to have sex. I've never been able to father a child because my sexual dysfunction and my emotional dysfunction are so deep. And, these are things that I wish I never knew. I wish I never knew the depths of the depravity, the damage that cuts across everyone. Circumcision cuts across everyone in this society. And you talk to new immigrants who are convinced, Willie told the anecdote, convinced that they need to cut their sons, or they say yes because it's presented in this cheerful way and they don't even know what they're agreeing to. And all of a sudden they have a maimed child. So that's why I wrote my memoir. Marilyn Milos, who Willie mentioned earlier, the founder of the movement, wrote a memoir at the same time. Hers is called Please Don't Cut the Baby. They're both going to be released on February 4th. There will be soon a pre-sale up on intactamerica.org, which is Intact America's main website, and also a website called Skin in the Game. And we will be also launching a complaint function probably around the time this podcast comes out, where people can send in their complaints about circumcision solicitation, circumcision complications, and forcible retraction. This is a huge problem. 1.5 million babies every year. Everyone in the child's life is impacted. the parent who agreed or didn't agree, and somehow the person who cut the child, the grandparents, the siblings, future partners, marriages that break up over it. It's massive. And we want to make the medical industry accountable for this huge violation, because that's where it comes from. You can blame the parents all you want, but if the parents wanted it, why are doctors trying to sell it so hard? And this is something that everybody can do something about, right? So Andy, I would assume you will become comfortable saying when you see somebody who's pregnant, hey,
yes,
hope you don't circumcise your son. We can all do something about this. We can not, doctors right now today could say, hey, I'm not doing that again. I'm never doing that again. Will that be easy for them to live with the damage they've created? No, but they can do it. They can just walk away and say, nurses who set up the baby for circumcision, strap him down in the circumstraint, swab his genitals, lay out the tools. They can say, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. There's a shortage of healthcare professionals. Find something else to do. You have no excuse for circumcising your son, for facilitating a circumcision, for encouraging a circumcision, soliciting a mother to sign a so-called consent form. No one has any excuse for performing circumcision on a newborn baby. It is absolutely, there's no justification, no argument for it. What possible argument could you have? Sometimes, I'm asked to be on a show, where they want a fair and balanced debate. What are they going to put me up against? It's like doing a show on sex trafficking and inviting the trafficker on the show. They're going to put a doctor, next to me who's going to say, well, after all, we cut the umbilical cord. What's the difference? It's like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
Did you really say that? So there is no justification, absolutely none, not anything that excuses strapping down a baby and cutting off part of his penis. And you're paying somebody to cut off your son's penis.
Trauma.
And your parents didn't do that. You should be kissing the ground your parents walked on.
I was literally going to end this with saying how proud I am of my parents and thankful and grateful for them. And I've started having this conversation with them before this, and it's already been healing. And this conversation, you two have basically been what little Andy needed 30 years ago, and what I think there's a lot of kids out there that need now still. And I think it's part of that is, this needs to be in sex ed. This needs to be in everything that we do. And I just really, I agree that things that aren't, we need to change things, and having conversations like this is step 0 and 1. And I hope it leads to more things. And Willy, Georganne, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening to the Naked Man podcast. Out of 12 true-false questions, I got 9 right. Did you do any better? You probably did. Leave your score in the episode comments or tag us at NakedManPod on socials. If you want to stay naked, make sure to follow and subscribe to the Naked Man podcast wherever you get your podcasts. This episode was edited and produced by Freddie Beckley and hosted by me, Andy Green. Next time on the Naked Man podcast, I sit down with published author and certified somatic sex coach Rachel Overval to learn how to share my own fantasies and desires with sexual partners. In the meantime, as my dad always says, be sweet.